Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and during these half-hour programs I'll be interviewing writers about their craft and their ambitions and their careers in writing. Those careers might be in poetry, they might be in fiction, they might be in nonfiction. If we find a writer who's a copywriter for an advertising agency, we'd be glad to have him or her on as a guest. We'll be having a good time here on the Writer's Block, but we'll be sharing ideas as well. If you have ideas for us, watch during the credits for our address. Our guest tonight is Carlsen. Carl grew up in New York City and in suburban New Jersey. He came north to graduate from Tufts University in 1972 and later took a master's degree from Bowling Green University. His thesis for his master's degree, he tells me, is Unforgettable Characters in Reader's Digest. I believe he said it was a masterwork that's somewhat been overlooked. He's at present a professor at North Shore Community College, Beverly, where he has been since 1974. Among his many edited works and among his various poetic works, he has asked me to mention especially Brickyard Stories, a 1985 treatment of the oral testimony of neighborhoods and residents in the Lynn area. We'll have more to say about Brickyard Stories later in the show. Let's go over and talk to Carl now. Hello, Carl.
Well, John.
Did I get that right? The description of unforgettable characters in Reader's Digest? How did you describe that earlier?
An underappreciated but brilliant analysis, I think.
Is that available in the...
That is available in the Bowling Green State University Library.
I'll tell...
And you can order it through the library. I'm sure the library swap program, they can have it in your hands by Christmas, I'm sure.
Thank you. I might send off. This, I know, is more available, and it's available closer. Let me see if I can show this on close-up. This is the Brickyard Stories, which Carl has edited. I'll hold that still to see if we can come in on that. You can read the title, I think, and below the title is a map of part of the Brickyard, of the old Brickyard industrial area of Lynn.
Yeah, basically a working class melting pot neighborhood that is actually many of the houses, or several of the houses on that map are still there today, but many of them have been torn down during urban renewal, and the current Lynn Voke and Neptune Towers are I guess the modern replacements for many of the old buildings.
You are not yourself from Lynn.
No.
Originally, you're from New York City, New Jersey.
Yeah.
How did you become attracted and interested in this project, Brickyard Stories?
Well, when it became known that the college would go to Lynn,
North Shore Community
College, I began to hear about this neighborhood. I'm not sure how, but the first real thing to come into my hands that was Brickyard related was a similar kind of pamphlet actually put out by the college's Outward Bound program at the time. I think it was 1980 or so. And these were oral interviews with Lynn residents, many of whom were from the Brickyard. Then I began hearing Brickyard related stories, all of which seemed very American and kind of interesting, and I began finding, actually a woman showed up in my creative writing class at night who, along with several of her friends, were former Brickyard residents, and they met monthly to kind of chew the fat and talk over old times. So there was, in fact, a kind of center of story ready-made there, and they were very receptive. And I interviewed them, several of them, some of their husbands, some of the other people that I met along the way. And essentially what I've done in here has been to kind of change things around. I think keep the kernel of story while making it perhaps literarily interesting.
So, did you record them?
Yeah,
During the interviews?
I've got tapes.
You've got the tapes?
It's essentially an oral history project that turned out to be a bunch of poems.
You mentioned earlier before we went on that you'd be willing to read one or two of these. Can I ask you to do that now?
Sure. Maybe I'll read one called "The Horses at Polanski's," and this is actually one that I've taken from the interview I did with Evelyn Lazarus, who was in fact the woman who came into that class. That was
creative writing
the
class.
creative writing class when I began that project. It was kind of a very fortuitous coincidence. But I've pieced this together from her interview. You know, she's talking here about Polanski's junkyard, and this was junkyard.
So you are a co-creator of this?
In a way, yeah.
In a way.
I think, let's put it this way, depending on how strict one interprets the rules, if there are any, of oral history, this can be looked at as excessive intervention on my part. Some people might say, well, you kind of have a nerve kind of artfully arranging their words. Why is that needed? I guess I needed to do it in order to, bring out this booklet, because I was basically faced with this problem. Well, now I have 40, 50 hours of tapes. Now what? What do I do? And I guess this is what I decided to do. And this is one of the pieces that is part of it.
And the name again of the woman?
Evelyn Lazarus. She is,
Evelyn
I believe,
Lazarus.
a teacher in Lynn, and I think she runs the summer school, too, if I'm not mistaken. So, this is her talking. When the junkies' workday was over, we used to sneak into the junkyard and get on top of the roof of the shed. I guess I always preface this by saying, and I forgot to today, that this was back at a time when junkie did not mean substance imbiber. We'd find an old mattress and lay it on the ground and jump off the roof with a broken umbrella we thought was going to hold us up like Mary Poppins. We used to talk to the horses and pet them. It was a rough place. One time I remember the ground looked gray, and all of a sudden an eye popped up. It was a rat, the same color as the dirt. We squealed and ran. A dog in the neighborhood dug up all the dirt, and my God, I don't know how many baby rats there were. The dog just twisted the rats right up. They were just lying there under a covering of ground. I remember waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning. The whole house looked lit up. It was the flames from Polanski's. We got dressed and went outside, and this black man, Mr. Preston, had on his nightgown and robe, and he was crying, and his robe was burnt. He had tried to open up the doors to let the horses out, but he couldn't. 4 horses burnt and a colt. The next day a truck came and took the horses away. They were burnt stiff in a standing position. They were just cooked, and the smell was terrible. I remember the kids saying they would make glue out of the horses and Jell-O. I wouldn't eat Jell-O for years. Mr. Polanski wouldn't let us ride his horses, but every once in a while they would sneak out and wander into somebody's yard. We would talk to them and give them sugar. We had a great time, but we couldn't ride them. All we thought about was petting them and holding our cheeks against theirs.
That's wonderful. I like that a lot. Do I compliment you, or do I compliment Mrs. Lazarus? That has, the poetic drive and the pace and the rising.
Yeah, that's what I did.
And
I guess I basically am a poet with nothing to say, so I've taken what these people have to say and made my own poems out of them.
I like that very much. Why don't we give this book another plug? You mentioned before the show this is available?
Yeah, you can get this at the Lynn Historical Society and at the Essex Institute in Salem. The Lynn Historical Society is on Green Street in Lynn.
The Lynn Historical Society
right.
and the Essex Institute in Lynn and Salem, respectively.
Right.
How much is it?
$3.
That's good. That's pretty reasonable these days, I'd say.
Well, if time is $2.50, this is okay for $3.
Okay, so that's available for $3 in Lynn and
in Beverly. I'm sorry.
In Salem.
In Salem.
You are a writer as well as an editor, and you write poetry that we don't have to discuss co-authorship about.
That's correct.
Can I ask you to read something of yours?
Sure.
You mentioned a basketball poem.
I'd love to.
We're in the basketball season.
Basketball is my passion.
I happen to know that you're a frustrated Boston Celtic.
Yeah. I'm a basketball player who sometimes writes poems, as opposed to a poet who sometimes plays basketball. This is a poem, I guess, that was inspired by, or prompted by shooting around in the gym at Tufts after, I guess, not only the season but the semester was over. It was a poem actually that I was shocked to find in looking at the other day. I wrote 7 years ago, and there's a part of the poem, I guess, where I make a reference to the cycle of 7 years, I guess, a kind of lore that every 7 years the body's cells are replaced. And it had been 14 years since I had been on the court as a jumbo when I wrote this poem, and it was then, at that time, several weeks ago, 21 years since I had been on the court. Another cycle of 7 years had gone by.
This poem was about experiences gathered 14 years before it was written.
Right.
And what is a jumbo?
Jumbo, the Tufts Jumbos, named after P.T. Barnum's jumbo elephant.
I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed not to have known that.
Well, unfortunately, Jumbo perished in a fire in Barnum Hall. And in fact, when I went to Tufts, there was the stuffed Jumbo there, and I was told, believe it or not, that pennies placed in his trunk on the eve of final exams, coupled with cramming beneath his bloated body, would result in great luck the next day. I, of course, never went.
How many pennies did you put in?
None. I mean, I thought to myself, Jesus, they're trying to get donations anyway they can.
So you were a tough jumbo.
I was a Tufts jumbo for actually for 2 years, and then I kind of switched and became a poet or writer for 2 years. I had a kind of dual career in college, I guess.
So this material is from your athletic background, and
from my athletic background,
and the art is from your literary
from my
background.
wording, from my So some people think it's a little. I've shown it to some people who I think are not real hoopsters, and they think it a little too cluttered. But I think real hoopsters will appreciate the necessity of all of the references here.
I'm sure we have dozens of hoopsters out there watching.
I'm sure. As long as we're not competing with any Celtic home games or away games. So this is called basically shooting foul shots in the empty gym. It's 9:45 Wednesday night. Tomorrow morning, final exam carols will fill the gym. Tonight's the last night the gym can be used. I'm the only one here to use it. I'm at the same foul line, the same distance from the same hoop where I sunk 11 for 11 against MIT, playing a game that established my game for the 69-70 season. The team's still in the gym, picture on the wall behind the stands, squarely over my left shoulder. But the basket's different now, collapsible, to prevent Darryl Dawkins' glass smash and slam jams. The backboard's surely been replaced, and there's padding on its underbellies. I've seen pros duck their heads as they pass underneath after dunking. I've always been a marginal dunker myself, dependent on springy floors, the psyche of the moment, the feel of the ball in my hand. As I palm it now, it feels like a cantaloupe. I can't dunk anymore, haven't since I left the team. The floor is rubbery now, a tartan surface, no painted foul line on wooden slats, just a border between a blue 3-second zone and a tan court. I nudge the top of my right foot to the very edge of the border, my left foot comfortably 8 inches from the line. I still shoot them the same as I did in grade school, modeled after a photo in the letter section of a 1958 sport magazine. Hoop great Bob Pettit of the St. Louis Hawks, ball cradled in his left hand, guided by the right, all extended above his head. The shot then a flick of the wrist, the minimum of motion, the minimum chance for error. Since the 70s, my foul shot has fallen inconsistent. From TV, I learned from Cedric Maxwell to have a mental checklist, to go through it every time, to ensure doing the same things each time in the same order. The secret to foul shooting is consistency, the secret to any sustained success. Coach Woody Grimshaw told me a few days after the MIT game how much he liked watching my form. Lately, I understand the satisfaction of good form. Too bad old Woody made basketball boring. Orphaned but All-American at Brown. Pro career aborted by illness. He smoked cigarettes during practice. Still shooting foul shots, some going in. If I stay here long enough, I'll sink 11 in a row. The team picture, still a turn of the head away. I pivot right, dribble down court to the other basket, the scene of my first collegiate field goal. I'm grabbing the rebound behind the backboard to the right of the hoop, facing the foul line. Up jumping, I put up a little twinger. Twist, soft spun banker off the glass, through the hoop like a cushion shot. Most times I reenact this shot, I have to think about the spin. Tonight it comes naturally. 3 times. Tonight, once is not enough. Dribbling back up court to the foul line, eyeing the back of the rim, I think after 14 years I've wound up back here, the same point on the same line, the same distance from the same diameter hoop, the same goal for the same size ball, but between then and now, only the measurements have remained the same. Though I'm the same height, about the same weight, if all the body's cells are replaced every 7 years, each cell has been replaced not once but twice. I consider the only connections between past and present the theme picture on the wall, the silver girders arcing overhead. I know now I can gain or lose anything in this life, but I'll always have my game.
I don't think there's too much hoopster stuff in there.
No.
I think it flows well. Tell me if I'm wrong. It's not about basketball. For all the hoopster imagery, it's about, what is it about? I don't want to say age, because you're a young guy.
I'm a young
but
guy.
Is it something to do with that?
I guess, and also I think the agelessness of myself in play. And I think maybe that's something that all people who experience or who play sports have access to, I guess.
You said the ageless.
Agelessness.
Yes.
I guess, yes, I am slower. Yes, I can't do what I used to do. Yes, I can't jump as high or nearly.
Can't dunk anymore.
Cannot dunk. Can't even get close. Don't even try. But still, when I'm out there trying to do the best that I can, I feel like, I'm connected with, I guess, the way I felt when I was playing 10, 20, 30 years ago even. So I guess it's a game that, rather than thinking or rather than moaning that, oh, Jesus, I can't dunk, I'm getting old, I guess you make me see that I like playing it because I feel like I'm in touch, or there's a continuity to my life.
So it's a positive.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen other basketball poems in which the writer sort of laments that his only skill is just to be brutal on defense now because he can't keep up with the kids. Have you seen those kinds of poems?
Well, let me say this: if this guy, my hunch is this guy never had much on O to begin with, and so that's probably why he's become a defensive specialist. But I think, you can still twing him up. You could still. I mean, I, believe it or not, played in the Tufts alumni game just about 10 days ago, and I was the only guy on my team over 6 feet who wasn't dunking with ease. It was embarrassing. These guys were going up there. They looked like they were putting donuts in coffee cups. I mean, and it was, and I just, but, I got in a couple of hoops. I didn't have to be, they were defensively and offensively brutal. That was really where I noticed that they were just physically animalistic. There was no
pretending to be pros, sort of.
Well, in a way, but the game is. The game is a very physical game. Anybody who tells you differently is, mouthing some party's line, and I guess it made me realize that however skillful I might think myself to be, the fact is that I have become, I'm de-animalized in a way.
I want to go back to the progress you talked about being a tough jumbo for 2 years, your freshman and sophomore years, and then you stopped playing basketball for Tufts?
Yeah.
And you became
I became immersed in writing.
Writing. I'm interested in that progress. How did that take place? What changed you, and do you think of them as being exclusionary?
Well, I think, believe it or not, it became more fun to be a writer at college during those years for me than to play basketball. And now I think back and wonder, how could that possibly happen? But the fact is that the coach was not a very inspiring coach. And on the other hand, there was something exciting and perhaps inspiring about the people I was meeting through writing and also through the teachers there. I had X.J. Kennedy for poetry, and while he told these wonderful stories about poets and just made me want to be a poet just so I could hang out and be, if not part of these stories, then part of the world that these stories were from. And so essentially writing, and we brought out our own magazine, kind of, I don't know, we can't call it, an independent magazine, and an alternative to these.
This is in the 60s.
Yeah, this was in the, actually 1970, 71.
Late 60s,
yeah.
early 70s. Excuse me, I just got the high sign that we have only about a minute left.
Jesus, we're just starting to get warmed up.
It went awfully fast. I want to present you with a gift that all our guests on the Writer's Block get, a jar or a canister of whiteout to be used in your career as a writer. I know you don't make that many errors, but in case you do, we also have, we occasionally for performance excellence, our studio audience sometimes responds with great enthusiasm. I think I could feel that they had that desire to respond to your poems. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you, John, for giving me this chance to gab.
I'd like to thank all of our audience for being with us tonight as well. If you've learned something about writing or enjoyed talking to Carl or listening to Carl talk about writing, then the Writer's Block has been a great success. I hope you can be with us next time on the Writer's Block. Good night.